Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in here to the Ryan Weiner podcast. Our guest today is Mr. Ned Matinnia. Ned is a scientist and a medium. He actually came from being an atheist, and then after some different experiences, and he found himself having a different outlook on things. He now is a person who runs the one of the near-death experience groups on Facebook, with over about 250,000 people for it there, and also a former member of the International Association of Near-Death Experiences. This is a place for studying everything we do that has to do with existence, like I've said. And so, Ned, if you want to take it from there and break it down for us, tell us what you'd like to talk about.
Thanks, Ryan. In terms of INs, and so I'm actually still a member, although I'm not a board member. So, but yeah, I I guess in terms of my background, I'm a seeker, and I've always been a seeker of truth since I was a kid. I wanted to understand reality and how everything worked and how people worked, and that's even that led me accidentally into like astrology, numerology, and human design. And even then, I'm not like a full believer. I will ask a lot of people their birthdays. I will look up like celebrities or presidents and analyze and see are there correlations. And just over time, certain things have proven themselves over and over again. So I'm a scientist at heart in that way. I'm open to the spiritual, and I've also had a lot of spiritual experiences, friends who've had near-death experiences, and as someone who questioned why I was here as a teenager, I needed a reason. It seemed like humanity was often the blind leading the blind, and I thought, uh, what am I doing here? This place seems backwards or primitive. Like, aren't shouldn't we be more advanced or more intelligent? And so, in all of that seeking, I basically came across near-death experiences, psychics, mediums, intuition, and the fact that intuition is real. As a scientist, if you ask a typical scientist out there, they will probably tell you that there is no such thing as intuition. In that, intuition is a nice idea. Perhaps it's just a nice coincidence. Every so often, that kind of has an illusion appearance of intuition. But we basically are biological uh, robots, and our brains control everything, and based on the chemicals in our brain and our moods and all that, it basically dictates everything. And when the brain activity stops, our whole existence stops, and that's it. There is no afterlife, there is no karma, there is no soul. Those are all just human concepts to make us feel better. So that is the current popular mainstream scientific understanding, and especially as we are building towards AI now, and people are talking about, is AI conscious or is it sentient and all this. Um, it's a tangent on this is that it's amazing how incredibly powerful AI is becoming in terms of just a few years ago, it was kind of like a side track. It's like, only a few people were studying it, and it seemed like the Turing test was still far off. And then all of a sudden, we are here now. AI is basically having conversations as good as or better than a person's best friend or even a spouse or girlfriend. There are people who are talking to their AI bots like all day, all night, as if they were a real person. And so it's amazing that technology and neural networks are emulating a process that is probably happening in our brains. And even with all of that, we still have the question of consciousness of like, you know, uh, near-death experiencers and mediums will, and anyone with intuition, which we all have deep down, um, intuition is beyond that level of um, logical analysis that happens in an AI network, in terms of analyzing semantics or words to understand a meaning and what a person is asking for. That's a tangent. But
Yeah.
yeah. So is there a particular focus area um, uh, you want me to dive into at first?
If you wanted to, I guess, you said you are a medium. And so do you do channeling as well, or when we say medium, do we simply mean talking to spirits of people that have passed on or crossed over?
And so, in my experience, it's people who have crossed over. I think I have also channeled, and the deeper you dive into it, the more it all kind of blends in terms of what is channeling. Channeling is basically listening to or being receptive to information from a spirit and then basically just either writing it or speaking it. And so mediumship is that also the contact with the spirit and basically observing or receiving their information, their image, their words or knowing or emotion, and then relaying it. So it's basically like I would say doing mediumship is like a subtle form of channeling. Channeling as we know it is more about like long form writing out or speaking out like a longer message.
Yeah. Okay,
And
gotcha.
so
Okay.
I'll add, as a scientist at heart, and I used to be an atheist because I need evidence because of how much hype and misinformation is out there. I'm sure you recall in leading up to 2012 and during that,
Oh yeah.
you know, so much hype around that. The end of the world. Are we going to like wake up on the year after and basically enter a whole new dimension or paradise?
Right.
No. And so
Yeah.
it's, but it's all about the interpretations. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's symbolic of a larger, longer shift that we're in over time. And so, yeah. And
Mm.
oftentimes the truth is more boring. It's like, we're in a shift, yes, but we have to do the work, we have to make the choices, we have to go through upheaval sometimes to out with the old and in with the new with our choice. We have to enough people have to choose love intentionally rather than like a lot of people tend to be apathetic or think, well, our system is rigged and it's all screwed up. Don't even vote or pay attention. Focus on your own lives. That is has become popular, but I don't think it's the optimal path. I know that for a lot of people, watching news is stressful, and so for those people, don't watch it. Focus on things that are more uplifting, and it takes all kinds. But your question about the mediumship. Oh gosh, yeah, that was a whole tangent. Let's see, because I started talking about the current events and shifts. So shortly uh, after 2012, I think it was in 2014, I started having uh, my first mediumship readings in terms of receiving them, and it was a curiosity. As an open-minded skeptic, I wanted to see, was there anyone out there watching over me and what information and is that accurate? Is there anything that's helpful? And as I did that, I saw there was a pattern of they were telling me, personal messages, but then also, I can also do this, and that they were encouraging me. And it was kind of like a procrastination because, as opposed to a person with a lot of ego who's like, yes, I'm a self important medium and I'm going to become famous, it was kind of like that's interesting. I feel unsure about this, but I want to help people. And then over time,
Yeah.
I met um, a pair of mediums from Wales who at the time I lived in Denver, and they were very compassionate and helpful. And they started hosting mediumship circles, and so those are basically like trainings or practices. And as an open-minded skeptic or scientist, I attended, and I learned a lot. And I learned that I can do this, and that a lot of us can, if we focus and if we try. And also, I learned that it's the polar opposite of of what the skeptics say. Because if you listen to any skeptics, they'll basically say it's a cold reading, or it's a tricks. You look at a person and you analyze their age, analyze their clothes, analyze everything about them, and make educated guesses. Actual mediumship is the opposite. It's like you don't even. It's actually better if you don't see them. You don't know like anything about them, and
Right.
and that because you're tuning in directly to spirit inside, and you just are without thinking, relaying impressions that you get, and you basically say it. And oftentimes you don't have any idea what it is or why. Like sometimes I'll see an apple and I don't have any idea. I try to interpret it. I know that oftentimes apples are a sign of health, and it could be an encouragement for the other person to eat apples, or it could be a person who really, uh, let's say, loved apples or worked at Apple. So it's the opposite of what the skeptics say it is. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No, I think that's yeah. I speaking from somebody who's had both the experiences of somebody saying, "Here, I get this reading about you, right?" And it's something very dead on. It'll, when you were like 5, this thing happened, and it's like there's no way anybody could guess that. And then, yeah, I've definitely had the experience of the cold readers too, where it's like they look at a guy in his 40s and figure, well, he probably lost a parent by now. So if I start off by asking, has this guy lost anybody? I'm probably going to get a hit on this. And it's unfortunate, man, that those people are out there because they make it so they make it so dicey and so sketch for everybody who can actually do it that it hurts everybody else. Is trying to do that kind of thing. When you were, you said as an atheist, and I am a science-minded guy too. My thing is quantum mechanics, which is kind of actually what got me into then understanding the concept of everything being connected and sort of consciousness and everything. I came at it from the science point of view. When you were talking about, needing evidence, did you have anything you found to be sort of evidence that was non-anecdotal or just your experience before you started getting those mediumship downloads, or what, or was that kind of where you were open and that events sort of cemented it that something was going on?
I was open. And so before that, I recall, synchronicities. And I remember in high school, I liked this girl, and oftentimes, I was extremely shy, and because of a childhood trauma, um, nothing ever came of that. I basically was so wounded at that time. But I recall many synchronicities of like, if I was, late for class, or I turned around the hallway, and then all of a sudden, at the same time I did, she came around the other end, and we were the only two people there, and we looked at each other, and it happened like, you know things like that. Or seeing a, a clock signs, or numbers, and
Mhm.
over and over again, like there are times, like it's almost like spirit wants to get my attention or to reassure me so much. I will actually, over the course of a day, I, I some days I might have actually done this, of like a record of, I see the 111, and then 222, and then 3 like the whole day. And like, and
Right.
whenever I see it, I'm just like thankful, and I almost have like a minute of prayer, of gratitude, of like, because it's hard here, and especially when you have trauma from your childhood, when you don't have close friends, and when your family is kind of distant, and you don't really resonate with them too much. And I think a lot of us have that experience, that experience of having chosen family or friends who feel more like family compared to your actual uh, relatives. And that's a whole tangent. But I know by now how we pick our parents for reasons, and so like in my case also, almost every reading I've had, my dad comes up, even though I never think about him or talk about him, but they're like, your trauma, your issues, which you're still healing, it's because of him. I'm like, yep, yep, that's accurate. And so it happens so regularly, and so it's one of those markers of accuracy, that they pick on that. Um, and yeah, try to remember your question.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but oh yeah,
It's amazing how
and
that
so
happens.
before mediumship, I came across uh, near death experiences and Dr. Raymond Moody's book Life After Life,
Okay, yeah.
and um and that really opened my eyes because before that I I questioned being here on Earth. I questioned why I'm here, and I looked at science. And science, it basically says that we're a random accident and there is no purpose ultimately, And of course, there are many humanists or atheistic people who don't believe in God, however, still try to be good people and care about the earth and care about um, people, which is awesome, because ultimately that that's what matters in the end. Um, It isn't about like I believe in this and so I'm saved, or I don't believe so I'm in trouble. It's about what we do and why, our intentions, and, and that will come up uh, during the life review in NDEs, and perhaps we can talk about those. But
Yeah.
uh, as I read his book, I was amazed because I realized that there is, because all these are in medical records and these are not hallucinations. Different properties of them are so unique in terms of how they're almost burned into people's memories. Even if a person has had an experience when they were a kid, that they could be in their 80s and still remember it like it was yesterday. And how transformative these experiences are, and that they all talk about the same thing. They all talk about love, how important it is. Um, and so, as a person who was looking for answers and who looked at the world of religions, who looked at Eastern religions, Western religions, even the Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, um, all of those, I saw some commonalities in that. One, God is ineffable or a mystery. You can't ever wrap your head around it because it's always beyond. But it's always
Mm.
bliss, ecstasy, and it's always talking about what goes around comes around, and that message is extremely enforced, or uh, uh, comes out in NDEs, and so and
Mm.
as soon as I started to understand that, I realized, okay, there is a purpose. And perhaps I started remembering too, my sole purpose of like, yeah, like if I end my life, I'm I'm basically undoing, or I'm breaking all that responsibility, that contract. And so I went rather quickly from an atheist who felt that the people were terrible and life was meaningless, to a person who was like, well, I'm here for a reason. What can I do to make the most of my time here? Because, if this is a school, if this is a place to actually grow and learn and try our best, I want to make the most of it. Um, And it was also like I'll add, at the end of high school is when I stumbled into astrology on accident. It
Okay.
wasn't, like looking at an entertainment magazine of like little horoscopes. It was like I came across a website online. It was like a long and a very almost academic, but it was like the ancient academics, like the ancient wisdom, like the Greek philosophers' style of like explanation about, astrology and the signs. And like each sign had like pages of like eloquent explanation. And I was like, this is so interesting, and as I was curious and I wasn't just leaving it out of hand, I was like, I wonder what this is all about. Like, is there anything to this? Is this just a fairy tale? And I didn't know what my sign was or anything like that. And I started um, learning about it out of curiosity. And then I started asking a lot of people I knew what their birthdays were, and kind of analyzing. And uh, sun sign astrology is the basic kind. And so if I say I'm a Gemini, it means something. However, it's if you look at the whole chart, if you look at the moon, the
Mm.
planets, the angles, the aspects, the houses, it's so rich with information. And the more I learned and I looked at celebrities or famous people, because you can kind of objectively study them, in terms of behavior patterns and personality from interviews and whatnot. And so, and then I realized that there are patterns and there are accurate things. And I've seen over time, like if a person has, let's say, Mercury square Mars, they will sometimes be prone to arguments or kind of just high energy conversations. Or if a person has like a strong Saturn, they'll either be a hard worker, and who is very meticulous and responsible, or sometimes the opposite, and everything is falling apart uh, until they kind of learn the lesson of taking responsibility. Because Saturn is all about responsibility and work, putting in the work to achieve results. Um, and this is a tangent too, but I just thought of Tool's song. I think it's Lateralis,
Mm.
when he sings
Okay.
Saturn comes round again, and things
Yeah.
like that. Saturn ascends, and I think he was actually talking about the Saturn return, and he might have been around age 30 as he wrote that song. And
Yeah.
Saturn returns happen every 30 years approximately.
Interesting.
And so, and so,
Yeah. Tools
it sounds
are loaded information.
sorry.
Yeah. Oh, it's Tool. All of their stuff is just loaded with information, especially off that particular CD. Everything. I remember hearing Maynard talk about it actually, and he was like, "Yeah, some of it's free form lyrics like I've done in the past, but a lot of it has to do with like Kabbalah, astrology, alchemy. There's all this different themes for it." Yeah.
And that was actually, I guess, my very first introduction to spirituality in high school. Because before that, like I had my biology classes and we learned about evolution in high school, and I was like, yeah, that explains it. We're just a random accident, and things just kind of happened, and here we are. But this is just an ongoing experiment with no real purpose. And then at the end of high school, as I learned about astrology and I stumbled into it, it was like, well, if this is real, what does that mean about the universe? And it was almost like my first concept of God, of like a higher order of things. Like when I look at people and analyze, like, well, this person is like this, and it's looking in their chart, it's like something here, like with the planets, uh, is correlated. And how is that possible? What does that mean? And it was the first time I started questioning the bounds of mainstream science, because science, still it calls astrology a pseudoscience. Like it kind of mocks it. It says that's just a silly idea, that's impossible. And yet, if it is possible, what is that? Like, what other things are real, which mainstream science is completely shunning, and so it was like the opening of that doorway.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they think that astrology is literally like you said. Oh, I'm just gonna go see what what is Sagittarius today is. Oh, you're gonna be having new awakenings happen. Okay, whatever. People don't understand. Astrology is an entire mathematical science that has to do with all kinds of calculations and algebraic formulas and stuff like that, that goes back over something like, a couple thousand years, all the way back to Arabia and back to First Temple Judea, and all of that. So nobody keeps up with something for a couple thousand years if there's no truth behind it. People would just cast it aside and stop doing it. But people like yourself or like other friends I have who do astrology as an actual art form, they're dead on with their stuff all the time. Another thing for people who think it absolutely doesn't work, you'd be surprised how many CEOs and investment people absolutely 100% have like psychics that they work with and astrologers that tell them what kind of trades to make and stuff like that. And yeah, yeah, it's just there's tons of people that have done that. I can't. JP Morgan was the guy I was trying to think of. JP Morgan used to take a meeting with an astrologer every single morning before he went and did business, and the guy cleaned up at things. So apparently I think he was having a little bit of success there. Um, you had brought up something earlier beforehand, and that had to do with pre-life. I know that's one of the things I was going to ask. You were talking about, with your studies of the NDEs, and I was going to agree with you. Most of the time, they really all kind of have the same sort of thing, where somebody has crossed over, they are welcomed by a welcoming group or force or beings or different people. A lot of times, they have a life review of how things have been going up to that point for them, and then kind of given some parting words of information and wisdom to go back with. And in some cases, people come back with psychic awareness they didn't have before, and things along those lines. Then you have some people who have what I'm going to call kind of like the super, kind of more religious experience, right? Like they're very, very devout in the mythology of their particular faith, no matter what it is. And so they see characters directly corresponding to that particular faith, whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism. They have like this thing that's kind of tailored to that. Is that something that you have noticed also, that there's kind of a correlation between people that seem to be tied really strongly to an idea of something versus somebody like we were talking about with Mellon Thomas Benedict, who, when he found out he was dying, he started studying everything and he was very omnipartisan about like what he was studying. And he had a very different kind of, experience than somebody who crosses over and is told by, a flaming person that they're doing the wrong thing and having their fingers shook at them type of deal.
Um, I, yes, I've seen that is accurate in terms of oftentimes, well, and something that I have learned is that God or the universe in NDEs communicates with us oftentimes in the language and way that we will most understand, or is the most beneficial for
Yeah.
us. I will also add that, and this is something I love about NDEs, is that people are often blown away, or surprised. And so atheists will sometimes meet, like the loving light, or family members, or angels or whatnot, who they never even really believed in, and yet have watched over them, or who have a message for them. I have several friends who were atheists who've had NDEs and met, um, I'll call them saints, Padre Pio, or
That's
Mother Cabrini. These were actual people who lived on Earth who, uh, because of their religious works, have become tainted, and yet they have met with people uh, who never were aware of them or believed in them, and kind of either taught them things or comforted them. It's really interesting because um, it's how a person explains their NDE afterwards is often still filtered within their belief system, and someone who sees like a bright, um, shining person, um, we'll call it Christ or Jesus. Another person will say it was a being of light. Another person would say it was just the most amazing person, and they loved me. I don't know who they were. And so it's these labels, and oftentimes when people come back, um, the biggest thing that they say is that it's hard to put it into words because it's just beyond words. Um, and also, the whole thing about, you know, um, if we have eyes there, or vision, or are we just balls of energy? Like I've heard of all kinds,
Yeah,
of NDEs, and so in my current like conclusion or hypothesis is that uh, there are many levels or dimensions, and so depending on which place or realm we end up in, we might have different, properties. And so, it's a lot of people have said an NDE is like a trip, like on Earth. If a person uh, lands, let's say in the Arctic, or that they land in the Sahara or the middle of the ocean, all those experiences are so different, and yet they're all on Earth. And so, if we
right.
if we think of heaven or the other side not as just one place, but like it's so much variety, that will explain because, um, you know, Jeffrey Olson, he his NDE was from a car crash, and in that experience, he also lost his son. He talks about how when he was in the hospital on life support, he would often leave his body, and one time he met with his son who passed away, and in that moment, he got to hold him, he got to smell him, everything. It was extremely healing, and it felt extremely vivid and real. And so in that moment, it wasn't only just beings of light, but also like it had the senses of touch and whatnot. And so I think it could be like so multifaceted. And one thing a lot of people do say is that our senses in spirit are much stronger than here on earth. Like our vision is like so much sharper and clearer, even at a distance. Our smell, our touch, our hearing, it's like we have super senses. And in these on earth, in our physical bodies, perhaps in this slower vibratory energy that we're in, everything is a bit duller in comparison.
Yeah, I've kind of heard the same thing from people. The other thing, we get even people talking about colors that don't exist on Earth, that they remember seeing colors that don't exist here when they come back, and they can't really describe to anybody what the color is because there's nothing to correspond it to here. Um, yeah, there's definitely those. Do you ever there's some different people out there that I know have had some, we'll call them negative experiences. Certain people that have come back from an NDE and said, "Yeah, I really did not end up in a great place, but here's I was told why. I was told basically, you live your life on Earth trying to dominate every other human, trying to take advantage of people, trying to just not living the right way." And what they took from it when they came back was they just said, I ended up in a place with people just like me. The way that they had been on here, it's almost like you're tuning a radio dial, and like, your soul goes where you're tuned to. If you're not tuned to a high frequency, if you're tuning yourself to lower stuff here on Earth, that you're kind of going to end up in the same place basically as with that at least seems to be what their kind of take on it was from that. Have you in reviewing or learning about anybody who's had any kind of negative experiences, have you had any kind of conversations about that?
I have, and I've also attended talks at the IANS conference, and I recall in Orlando in 2016, I, I was in the audience for Angie Fenimore, her talk. I don't know if you've heard of her, but in her case, I think it was either from attempted suicide or something traumatic like that. And in her experience, and she calls it like, hellish. But then she explains, in that it ultimately it was the best thing that happened to her because it made her face all of her own emotional baggage, all of her own loathing or anger or fears, and ultimately it was like a wake up call. And so I've heard this a lot in when people have these scary experiences, it's often uh, coming from the person's own energy or what is has been surrounding them, and once they process that and let it go and release, it actually frees them up, and then they enter the light or are basically shown and explain, yeah, you had to go through this. It was a part of your learning. It was a part of the process. And so I've heard that a lot. And like I know Howard Storm, you might have heard of him,
Yep.
but he was basically like that. He talks about I think he was an atheist, and he kind of was also arrogant in terms of he picked on other people, or he made fun of other people who were religious or whatnot, and he was extremely it was all about him, almost like narcissistic behavior. And in his NDE he was confronted by other beings who were like that and who were kind of were picking on him and who were hurting him, and he um finally released all that and asked for help and prayed, and then it came. And I will add too, in these experiences, which are dark or scary, oftentimes the biggest thing to change it is to ask for help, pray for help,
Yes.
call for help, and usually uh, that there are people who are so in their emotions of anger or fear of, and it's almost like it comes down to a sense of ego control. Like, I don't want to ask for help. I don't, it's almost like that, even in life, if you try to help a person and they're not really interested in it, you have to let them do their own, path. And sometimes they have to fall, to learn on their own. And so, but if when you ask for help or when you have a pure heart and you're not trying to control it all, you kind of surrender, and open your heart, then everything changes. And this idea, because in my NDE group, on Facebook, uh, it's I would say a lot of the people in there who are posting are not experiencers, but are curious about about the experiences. And so, and a lot of them, because I'm based here in the U.S., a lot of them were raised in religion, especially Christianity, and were told to fear hell, eternal hell, and if you're not a certain way or a certain, political way, or let's say your orientation and all that, like, are you going to end up in hell? Or even if some people have divorces and they're like, uh-oh, am I, is this bad? Uh, and the experiences are like, these are all human fears and laws and rules. It's like, if there is one thing that NDEs show that God and the universe cares about, it's our hearts and intentions, and what we do and why. And you just had a recent guest on. I think her name was Nicole Mewes. Am I saying that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I watched that, and I love how she explained it, because I've seen other experiencers also say this, of how she isn't always politically correct, or when it comes to like sexuality or appreciating our bodies or whatnot. Like, even that, a lot of traditions have so much rigid like rules or like fears about it, and it's almost like if you think about it in a more holistic or natural way, it's like. And also, Daniel Brinkley, you might have heard of him. His
Possibly.
NDE, he was by lightning, and he was like, yeah, the experience itself is like orgasmic, like it's the most amazing thing. And he sometimes jokes about prudes who, or like the religious people that he used to be one of in South Carolina. Over there, the strong Baptist communities are so strict about ideas of what is right or wrong and what will end you up in hell. And he's like, that's all human stuff. It's like we're here to enjoy responsibly. We're here to appreciate each other. We're here to live and not be in these rigid um, fear boxes. So I
Yeah,
answered the
absolutely.
question.
Yeah, that's really
Uh,
cool. I think just out of curiosity here, before we get away from here, the gentleman Howard that you were mentioning, was he an art professor?
yes, he was a
Yes, that's exactly
professor. Yeah,
art professor. He was in the hospital, and he's the one where he said, "Yeah, the people came to my room and started leading me down the hallway somewhere, and then it got real bad, and it started to get dark." And yeah, no, he's the exact guy. He is one of the people. He said, even while I was having these people turned into monsters, started mauling him and tearing him apart. And he said, I was still so stubborn and so egoic that even though I realized I was in hell and with people just like me, I was too proud to ask for God's help.
yes,
Except he did. And as soon as he
eventually.
did, then the situation changed and those things could not attack him anymore. They didn't have any more power over him. He was pulled out of where he was and brought into the good place, I guess we'll just call it. Um, but yeah, that's the idea that once you've passed away, everything is off for you. Sorry, apparently you're still allowed to change your mind as to where you want to be, in that area there, as long as you can see the light, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and if anything, I would say the experiences and even pre-birth memories. Like, have you heard of Christian Sundberg?
I don't think
If
so.
you ever interview him,
I was going to
because
say,
I don't.
I was just about to ask you about the pre-birth stuff there, and I apologize. The video feed is kind of a little bit jumpy. So I'm sorry if I cut you off there.
It's okay. But yeah, I will say, like, if you ever interview him, I recommend. Like, I don't recall that he's had an NDE, but he does have the pre-birth memories, and he talks about, like, if anything, our free will is emphasized on the other side. Like, it's, if you imagine our souls are the ones who chose to come to Earth.
Right.
We pick our parents, we pick a lot of our lives. Some of us more than others. From what I've learned, some of our lives for particular reasons we don't always understand here in the moment. It could be karma, it could be lessons for us or others, it could be to help a higher purpose involving many other people. Some of our lives are very constrained in terms of, like, a lot of stuff will happen and we can't avoid it. Like, it has to happen exactly as we plan it. Other times, for some lives, it's almost like, well, this thing, you pick your parents, you're going to have that. You might have like a soulmate who comes in as a teenager who's your first love or something, or you might marry and have a marriage forever with them because you agreed. But other things within that, like, are completely open. And so in your life, you might have, or some people may have a lot more freedom of choice on things. Others are a lot more constrained, and there's always a bigger reason behind it all. And so, um, yeah, it's fascinating because this idea of the soul contracts or karma, and it always, I say always, is a surprise because, I don't know if you've experienced this or you've seen your friends, or I just have seen so many people who will meet, like, a partner, and we'll get excited about it, and we'll talk about this is the soulmate forever and ever, and they're both excited. And then within a short time, everything changes. And perhaps it was a lesson, perhaps it was karma, perhaps it was, you know, we never know, like, the deeper reasons for anything until our time comes. And once we're back in spirit, we our blindfold will come off, and we see everything that had to happen and why. And so, all we basically can do is, in every moment, if we're blindfolded, or we don't know intentionally of the deeper elements behind things, but if we just act as best we can, we treat everyone as best we can, perhaps a person that we have as a coworker or as a partner or parent, is difficult. We try our best. Perhaps we are learning from them or teaching them or karma or all of it. But as long as we do our best in every situation ultimately is for our good and the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to get into some of the thoughts on the pre-life stuff, and then also past lives. I don't want to forget about that. But yeah, and the pre-life thing, that's another thing that, anybody out there who's kind of new to the subject matter, that's something you should look up. We're classically taught this idea that, this Old Testament type of thing, oh, you're created, and then God just, like a softball pitch, throws you down here and it's randomness, and, horrible things can happen. But if you don't believe in all of the things that are good, then you're not doing the right thing. Doesn't seem to be that way for people who cross over and come back. It seems much more to be an idea of, something, your creation is way, way beyond what you can really fathom in your brain right now type of deal. And that you chose to be down here. Okay. So like you picked at a bare minimum, you picked your parents probably. Or maybe you said randomly throw me down, but there's some kind of a purpose to you being down here. And you've got these kind of like base benchmarks maybe that are things that are going to happen in your life. Like maybe I decided I wanted to learn how to walk again, so I've scheduled myself to break both my legs. Hopefully, I have not done that in this life. Doesn't sound like something I'd find pleasant, but but that's the kind of thing that somebody might line up for themselves. And yeah, when this happens, it's a tragedy. And oh, I can't believe this. And God must be mad at you. That's why you broke your legs. No, I planned it actually because I wanted to challenge because that's why I'm here. It's a learning experience. I'm not being punished for anything. Um, and that's something I've never heard anybody come back from any kind of near death or even out of body experiences and say, man, you better play your cards right. That guy up there, he really likes to throw lightning bolts at you every time you say something he doesn't like or you disagree with the Bible or your clergy. No, doesn't happen. Everybody's treated with complete kindness, love, and empathy and respect. And it's some kind of a learning experience. And we're down here with a higher purpose. And that being said, so do you yourself, I know you've talked to some different people in your readings, do you have any kind of particular thoughts on maybe, what you planned out, or do you have anything that you think your general purpose for being here is, kind of in this incarnation?
I'll answer that because I definitely love that question. And on your previous point about the contracts of like, broken legs as an example, I was recently in Sedona, Arizona. And if anyone is curious about it, it's a beautiful spiritual town. It's in Arizona, between Flagstaff and Phoenix. It's almost like central Arizona. And the red rocks are amazing. But I was over there and I met a woman who is a intuitive medium and will help others in readings. And actually, she's a near-death experiencer as well, and perhaps I'll recommend if you ever want to interview her because,
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
and her name is Dominica. I don't know her last name, but we'll message each other after this.
Yeah.
But she talks about how in 2014 she actually tried to kill herself in on a I think it was a Los Angeles freeway. She jumped from a bridge on a highway onto the pavement, and she talks about how in that moment, in her NDE, her soul and the soul of the driver who hit her had a contract for that to happen, and all of that. It was just amazing to hear in her recovery process, and she's like, I that happened because I was so depressed. I needed a change, and that experience shifted my timeline to a whole new direction. And so it was like, wow. Um, so yeah. And then in terms of your question, um, yeah, and so in my life, well, I know that from readings with mediums and friends who are intuitive and friends who are near death experiencers who are intuitive because like you said, the experience almost always opens up a person's intuition even if they never believed in intuition. um and they've told me like this whole situation with my dad, and it's kind of correlated with my speech, which is still healing. because it's all in my emotions and wounds from that. Um, and so I picked that, and to go through a painful childhood. And it was for a reason. And I think it was to learn because what his effect on me was to silence my voice. And so because it was always his way, and it was always, you know, uh, he would sometimes call my sister and I, and also my mom, before she left him, stupid, or kind of, verbal abuse,
Yeah.
sometimes physical, but just that kind of demeaning, and kind of like you're worthless, and all this, and when you're a kid, you just absorb it all. And so it really, I would say, impacted me in school, because I could never, like, I felt like I wasn't as good as anyone else, and I never, like, made friends. I wasn't able to speak without stammering, and it was so embarrassing. And so I had um so little self-esteem. I think uh what some people have told me, which I think it could be true, is that, perhaps in a past life, or when I came into this life, because I had a strong personality elsewhere, and sometimes I might have abused it, like, is common. Like, apparently, it's interesting. Also, um, a lot of people who are spiritual, perhaps a lot of us have, and even, have you heard of James Van Prague, the medium?
Yes. Yeah. Very,
And
very
he
familiar.
and he talks about himself, like, it was either a reading or a memory, but he had a memory of a past life when he was like a war leader, or a colonel, or someone high up in the army, in the U.S. Civil War, and he was uh, ruthless, in terms of,
Yeah.
not caring about his soldiers or anyone, and attacking, and whatnot, without compassion. And he said in this life, his soul chose to be a healer and a medium, to sort of atone, or balance some of that. And so, rather than, like, a person who is cruel, who is hurting others, he wants to come in to help others. And so I think that the more I see, the more I realize that perhaps a lot of us are doing that. But I know in my life, it was to learn from my dad an example of how it feels on the other end, but also what not to do. And so since then, and my whole life, it's like, yeah, I don't want to hurt anyone. Like, I I have learned my lesson, and I've actually had readings since then, and they're almost like, hey, your lesson was in in the first part of your life. It's over now. You can heal. Like, it's okay now. And I'm still, like, in the trauma, like, slowly, like, catching up again. But and I think also I've heard things like, in my life, I came here for purpose, and we all do. Our purposes can be big or small, but they're all important. They could
Mm.
be a family man, a mom. They could be a speaker or a president. Like, you never know. But I know that it's in my chart too, astrology chart, numerology, human uh, design, and that I came here to share a message. And that's why I started the NDE group on Facebook. And that's why, even though my day job has been a software engineer, my passion is in getting the word out. Like, these experiences are real. They're not hallucinations. There is intuition. There is an afterlife and a before life. And this is important. Like, it's not just like a spiritual idea that sounds nice. Like, my passion is, like, imagine if this information is not just an idea, but information, factual information, was on LinkedIn more, or in the business world, or in governments. Like, I think we have a lot of people in the spiritual communities who are talking about love and light, and that's helpful. But what's important is to get it into the mainstream, to get it into the business world, because so much of what's happening to our earth, the pollution and the soil depletion, and the ruining of our oceans and atmosphere, is because of the business world. And if we have more of this information and more experiencers speaking up and saying, I am a CEO, or I'm a business leader, and I had an experience, and I know that yes, profit is important, but the goal of our economy shouldn't only be extreme profit. Like, if you think about all the billionaires or the companies who have so much, um, billions or trillions of dollars, and what are they doing with it? Most of them are just hoarding it, and the people at the top are buying yachts, or buying governments now, and it's as opposed to helping. Like, a lot of experiencers, they say we're here to help each other, and even Nicole, your guest, I think I forgot how she put it, but in terms of, the goal isn't about accumulating and comparing and competing. It's cooperating and supporting each other on, like, a small level, like locally, on a global level, without countries, without borders. We're all in this together. And any outdated ideas of, even what's happening in Gaza is so tricky, because I love all sides. Like, it's not, one or the other. It's like there are no chosen people, but because we're all chosen. And so,
Yeah.
um, it's killing of anyone, should be about basically outlawed. And a lot of us, we know this deep down, and yet, until we start to act it and voice it in the mainstream, it takes us speaking up. And I think how she put it was like, we have our choices of how, she called it energy grid. What kind of a grid, what kind of a pattern are we going to implement? Are we going to continue, a lot of smart people who kind of look away because they're focused on their Netflix and they're not caring? Or are we going to all start helping each other, um, speaking this message, that kindness everywhere is the most important thing, and that cruelty anywhere is not acceptable? And so, um, yeah, if there's any message in, I think about the animals, I think about the earth, and I know that the earth will be okay no matter what. Uh, but we do have to acknowledge, so many species have been extinct, and it's accelerating because of our destroying the Amazon, of our polluting the oceans, of all of these things are making life inhospitable. And we can turn it around. We can turn around the cruelty, the bombing, all of that. We just have to start, like, waking up more, and realizing, and the near death experience, most often it's that wake up call, and it happens on a personal level. And I think we almost kind of are having one, or going to have one, on a global level of, like, humanity. You know, what we're doing is not sustainable. So many people are suffering, even economically. Homeless keeps increasing. This isn't about any particular party. There are people who are cruel and selfish on both. We need to call out the
Yep.
cruel and selfishness for what it is, not, and support each
Yeah.
other. And even a person, this is a good example. In, let's say, in a, spiritual organization, which I value, there are people sometimes who do a lot of good, and yet who sometimes do, let's say, underhanded things, or their intention is for ego. If we can love the person and the soul, and just call out or just address, uh, the behavior, rather than, calling the person evil, that is so important.
Mhm.
Because all of us have, things that, we probably are holding on to, or behaviors, and we're still kind of outgrowing them, which are not ideal. I said a lot there. So, you know,
Yeah.
like, I think, if anything, my message that I'm passionate about is what I just said, and the fact that we will have our life reviews, and we will feel how it felt on the other end. No one wants to um, suffer or be in pain. And if you if you tell a person that there's a high chance that they'll be reincarnated here again, a lot of people are like, "Hell no, I don't want to ever be here again." Why? Because of how people treat each other. Imagine if we transformed how we treated each other, made this a better place. We wouldn't be so um, scared of that happening, which in all likelihood, unless, you know, there are some people who say that, this lifetime is their last. I don't have any authority on the accuracy of that, but I know that if a lot of us have had many lifetimes, we probably will have more. And the whole point of coming here is to learn in the moment and make the most of our lives now, and not have to wait for some future time to redo things because we kind of put it off.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of with the different incarnations on here, with the different readings you've done, I don't know if you've ever done any kind of past life regression therapy, or you've got, or not therapy, that's not the right word for it, past life regression talking treatment, whatever. Discovery sessions with hypnosis or through mediumship. Do you have any insights on your different past lives or past incarnations?
I have had, I think, two past life readings, and I don't have strong memories of um, them yet. I know that if I meditate a lot on it, perhaps it'll kind of unlock that.
Mhm.
But here are the things I've been told, which is really interesting because this also goes into the existence of a place called Atlantis or Lemuria,
Oh,
which,
still, yeah,
in our society, in our history books, that isn't anything like the only references to Atlantis is probably in, I think it was Plato had like
Plato.
a book on Atlantis or something.
To
And
Timirius, Plato.
uh, it could be someone actually either wrote about Atlantis or had like a paper on it or something like in ancient times. And I think, our
Yeah,
current
Plato.
archaeological or historical theory it was it's just a mythical place that he made up. But I've heard from a lot of experiencers that there was a place called Atlantis, and I was told repeatedly by multiple uh, near-death experiencers and mediums that I was in Atlantis. I was also in ancient Egypt, which I can believe that. It's just really interesting that and perhaps a lot of us were at Atlantis or ancient Egypt, but I don't have any uh, clear memories of those. But I do know I'm in my uh, reg- regression. I pictured myself as a boy in France. I was towards south of France, near where the Alps are, and southeast. And I was in a village, and I was carrying buckets of water by the river. And then this kind of stern lady was in charge and kind of like, you know, ordering me around, and I didn't feel like she was my mom, but just this woman kind of in charge. And when I had that, I pictured like her behavior and energy was like how my dad was. So I don't know if my dad was her in that past life, because I know oftentimes our genders are different in other lifetimes, but or if it was just the same message of almost like being a slave for someone else. That's that was interesting. And then I had a experiencer who told me in a reading that she saw me as a Native American hunter, that I was a great hunter, and which was interesting. I've also been told that I was a Mennonite, which is almost like the Amish. Like I was
Yeah,
a farm worker, and it was hard work, but I enjoyed it, which was interesting. And then also like one time. I guess I was told um, I was a woman, um, basically a homesteader, almost like in Kansas or somewhere in the early U.S. And in that case, I didn't have any power because at that time in that lifetime, my husband had all the power, and it was like something with my voice, like I couldn't express, almost like how in this life. And so I've heard these stories. I've also heard in World War II, I was in Poland and I was imprisoned by the Nazis, and I was a scientist, and they you know used me in exchange for not killing me or something. And so I can believe some of that, especially like in my life. I have worked on secret programs and things like that, and I always felt a little, like it's like I want to help the world, and so in times like that, it's almost like the government has so much power over you, and you have to be a secret or you have to keep secrets, and so that kind of had a parallel to that to that life, and so it's really interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's one of the things I want to do. I was actually just looking that up in Chicago to find any different past life regression hypnosis people around here to try and find somebody locally to just try it out, check it out, see what comes up with it there. Ned, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it. We have covered an enormous amount of different topics here. I want to let everybody digest this. I don't have any particular more like questions for you necessarily at this moment. I hopefully we'll do this again in the future, especially after that IANS conference in Oak Brook, because I think I'm going to go to that. And if you go to it, that'd be great. We can tell everybody all the different stuff we learn on here. Is there any parting words that you want to leave the audience with on any kind of action item or anything like that?
I definitely, I want to remind everyone how, the importance of kindness, and I've heard a quote from Aldous Huxley, and I'm not actually familiar with him a whole lot, but I've heard this, and he has a quote, and it's basically in my many years of research and studying, it's a bit embarrassing to say that the only thing I can really conclude is that um, kindness is basically the most important thing. And so, in and I agree with that. It's like in all of the experiences I've seen, near-death experiences, in medium readings, kindness, compassion is the most important thing, and yet it's what Jesus was talking about. It's what all of the religions are talking about at their core, and it's about living it. And so, and this is a good example. Right now, I'm aware of some drama between certain people who I appreciate, and in drama, all of a sudden, compassion is kind of often thrown out the window, or it's hard because if you see a person who is doing something offensive, it's like, how do you handle that with compassion? And I think that's a challenge for everyone because we all know we want to live this, but yet life is often hard and confusing. And so always remember how important it is to treat others with compassion, even the people who you feel are threatening or hurting you. See their soul as someone who is just like you, and separate their behavior. You can call out their behavior, protect yourself from their behavior. But if you add hatred or start insulting back, it just perpetuates. And so I would say, remember compassion and let go of hatred or animosity, and focus on bad behaviors and healing and stopping those, and while loving everyone as best you can.
Absolutely beautiful. Ned, we'll leave it on that one, man. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here today. please hit the like button and hit that subscribe button. It's how you will get more of this great information and how algorithms like YouTube know that we are alive and we are here. So please do that, and we will see you guys on the next event. Thanks so much.
Awesome.